A woman stands under a punishing midday sun, lowering a rope into a deep hole in the rock. We hear the phrase in sermons and sing it in worship songs. We imagine a quiet, gentle stream meant to soothe an anxious soul. 3 silver trumpets blast. The sound shatters the morning air. He walks up the ramp to the massive bronze altar. Another priest hands him a silver pitcher of wine. He holds the gold pitcher of water in his right hand. He holds the silver pitcher of wine in his left. The crowd goes completely silent. He raises both pitchers. He pours them out. Water and wine flow together, splashing down the hot limestone of the altar. The crowd erupts. They chant. They pray for the heavens to open. They pray for the prophetic rivers of Ezekiel to finally flow from the temple. It is a sensory overload of desperate national thirst. And right at that exact moment, on the last and greatest day of the feast, a man stands up in the temple courts. Jesus of Nazareth raises his voice over the noise of the crowd. He shouts a single, devastating invitation. "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." The timing is electric. The priest has just poured a golden pitcher. Jesus is promising an endless river. The people are looking at the stone temple as the ultimate source of their salvation. Jesus stands in the shadow of that stone architecture, and it does carry a profound spiritual comfort. But if you step into the physical dirt of the first century and redirects their gaze entirely to himself, he is not delivering a quiet spiritual metaphor. It is a hostile takeover of the entire religious system. He is telling them the temple is obsolete. The golden pitcher is empty. The cisterns of their religious rituals have run dry. The Mayim Chayim is standing right in front of them in human skin. The living water is not a ritual you perform. It is a person you approach. The ancient crowds understood the sheer audacity of that claim immediately. They argued. They divided. They wanted him arrested on the spot. But 2,000 years later, we have somehow lost the shock of what he offered that day. And instead of standing in the rushing river he promised, we have quietly gone right back to the bedrock, picking up the very shovels he came to take out of our hands. We do not use iron shovels and limestone anymore. We use different tools to dig our cisterns today. But the physical exhaustion is exactly the same. You know the feeling of the modern drought. It is the stark blue glow of a phone screen illuminating a dark bedroom at 2 a.m., scrolling endlessly for a drop of distraction. It is the sudden, a physical tightening in your chest when someone else gets the recognition you worked for. And if you look at the exact Hebrew and Greek words echoing beneath the text, you start to see something the gentle reading completely misses. It is the quiet, hollow echo you feel on a Sunday afternoon when all the noise finally stops. The room goes quiet, and you realize you are still chronically, inexplicably thirsty. We are a species terrified of running dry. So we dig. We build a career. We plaster the walls of our lives with achievements, hoping that if we just get the mixture right, the satisfaction will finally hold. We dig a pit in the shape of a romantic relationship, pouring all our desperate need for validation into another human being, expecting them to provide the endless supply of life that only God can give. Think about the sheer physical effort it takes to maintain your own image, the constant vigilance, the careful curation of what people see, the hiding of your fractures, the panicked patching of the walls every time a mistake threatens to leak your reputation into the dirt. That is the spiritual equivalent of hewing bedrock in the midday sun. We are tired because we are trying to manage a dead water supply in a desert, and the plaster always cracks. No human being, no job title, no bank account is designed to hold that much hydrostatic pressure. The relationship fractures. The dopamine rush fades. The money sits useless in an account while the anxiety remains entirely untouched. You lower your bucket into the very thing you were certain would finally satisfy you. The living water is not a symbol for a quiet, passive peace. It is a violent, uncontrollable force that rewrites the landscape, and you hear the dry scrape of wood against stone. This exhaustion is not the byproduct of a busy modern life. It is the symptom of a broken cistern. Jesus stood in the temple and offered an artesian spring that requires no labor, a fountain that erupts from the inside out, freely given to anyone who will simply admit they are thirsty. But taking that water requires you to do the one thing human pride hates most. It requires you to drop your bucket. It requires you to stop digging and to understand what that living water actually costs. You have to follow Jesus away from the roaring crowds of the temple feast. You have to move forward to a quiet, bloody afternoon outside the city walls. Because the water he promised is about to become a visceral, physical reality. The afternoon sky turns completely black. The crowds from the temple are gone. The chanting has stopped. A man hangs on a Roman execution rack, his lungs filling with fluid, fighting for a single agonizing breath. Feel the terrible, quiet weight of this moment. The sensory overload of the Feast of Tabernacles is a distant memory. Now, there is only the smell of blood mixed with vinegar, the rough splinter of a wooden beam, and the sound of weeping women standing in the dust. To understand what is happening when Jesus sits by that well in John chapter 4, you have to understand how an ancient Israelite thought about water. The Roman soldiers walk through the darkness. Their orders are to clear the execution site before the Sabbath begins. They take heavy iron mallets and shatter the shin bones of the two thieves, forcing a rapid asphyxiation. But when they come to the middle cross, the chest is perfectly still. Jesus of Nazareth is already dead. To verify the kill, a soldier takes a long, iron-tipped spear. He thrusts it upward, driving it deep under the rib cage, violently piercing the pericardial sac around the heart. John the disciple is standing just a few feet away. He watches the iron withdraw. And in chapter 19 of his gospel, he records a physical detail that echoes backward through the entire history of Israel. From the open wound in his side flows blood and water. This is not a random biological anomaly. This is the climax of the entire biblical architecture. Think about the history of this thirsty landscape. 15 centuries earlier, a dying nation stood in a burning desert. Moses lifted a wooden staff and violently struck a flinty rock, and water gushed out into the sand to save them. 6 months earlier, a high priest poured water and wine. They categorized it into two distinct types. The first type was gathered water. This was water you controlled, down the side of a limestone altar, while thousands prayed for rain. Centuries earlier, the prophet Ezekiel saw a sweeping vision of a restored temple. In that vision, a miraculous river of living water flowed directly out of the right side of the sanctuary, rushing down through the desert valleys to bring life to the Dead Sea. John is standing at the foot of the wood, looking at the spear wound, and he sees the prophecy happen in real time. The temple of God is not a building made of limestone. It is a body torn open on a hill. The living water is not a cheap spiritual metaphor. It is the literal life of the Creator poured out into the dirt. When Jesus stood in the temple courts and promised rivers of living water, he knew exactly what it would cost to open the supply. The true rock had to be struck. The side had to be pierced. The fountain had to be violently broken open so humanity could finally put down the shovel. The Pege erupts from a broken heart. But the river that started at a Roman cross does not stay at a tomb in Jerusalem. It keeps flowing. And 60 years later, an old man in exile is going to see exactly where this water goes. You dug a cistern, a bell-shaped hole in the limestone bedrock, plastered the walls to make it watertight, and channeled the winter rain into it. The biblical narrative is a massive, deliberate circle. It opens in a lush garden fed by 4 physical rivers. Humanity rebels. We are exiled into the dust. The earth turns hard. The sky stops raining. We spend centuries trying to engineer our own survival. We swing heavy iron tools against the bedrock. We mix wet plaster in the dark. We drink warm, metallic mud and call it a successful life. We build entire civilizations around broken, leaking pits, but the architecture of Scripture refuses to leave humanity in a drought. Look at the final chapter of the text, Revelation 22. It is an absolute sensory explosion. The old world is gone. The sea of chaos is erased. John looks at the New Jerusalem descending from the sky, and he records the ultimate reversal of the human condition. He does not see a freer. He does not see a dug well. He sees the ultimate pege, the eternal fountain, a river of the water of life. It is bright as crystal. It reflects a blinding light. It flows directly down the middle of the golden street. It rushes straight from the throne of God. It sat in the dark. It grew warm, metallic, and stagnant. It kept you alive, but it was dead water. It had no momentum, and the slaughtered lamb. Notice what is entirely missing from this final city. There are no heavy clay jars. There are no ropes fraying against sharp rocks. There is no blistering midday sun beating down on a tired outcast. There are no priests chanting for rain on a bronze altar. Because the drought is permanently broken, the final invitation of the Bible is not a demand for religious perfection. It is a provision for profound exhaustion. Revelation 22, verse 17, issues the cosmic call. Let the one who is thirsty come. Let the one who desires take the water of life without price. The Greek verb for take is lambano. It means to simply reach out your empty hand and receive a gift. You do not hew the rock. You do not build a fire to crack the limestone. You do not earn the supply. You just open your hands. The tragedy of the human ego is how desperately we fight this simplicity. We prefer our broken cisterns because a cistern gives us the illusion of control. A cistern lets you measure your own worth. A river requires total surrender. You cannot manage the Mayim Shayim. You cannot put a lid on an artesian spring. Then, there was the second type. In Hebrew, Mayim Chayim, living water. This was not rain caught in a bucket. You can only let the current overtake you. This is the great dividing line of all human history. Will you keep digging in the dry, cracking earth, or will you drop the shovel and stand in the flood? The text leaves the invitation wide open. The river of the new creation is already flowing. But the most important question is not what happens at the end of time. The question is what that water is doing inside of you. Right, in this exact moment. A prophet warned a dying nation about broken, leaking pits, and they perished holding their shovels. A woman carried a crushing jar to a deep well and dropped it to run with an artesian spring. A priest poured a golden pitcher on a limestone altar, and the true water shouted over the crowds. A tired humanity dug empty holes to catch the rain, and the Creator offered a geyser from the inside out. A soldier drove an iron spear into a silent chest, and the living temple broke open into the dirt. An exile looked at a restored, shining city, and saw a crystal river where no one thirsts again. This was an artesian spring bursting from the side of a mountain. This was a rushing river carving a canyon through the desert. And a Savior sits at the edge of every exhausted life and waits for us to let go of the rope. Same thirst, same river. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the jar. The heavy, 50-pound shell of fired clay, sitting completely abandoned on the hot stones of Jacob's well. She didn't take it back to the city. She didn't need it anymore. She traded the exhausting, daily labor of the freer for a pege that she carried forever inside her chest. The bucket was obsolete. If you are in a season where you are just physically and spiritually exhausted from digging, if you are tired of patching the plaster on your own reputation, your own security, your own spiritual performance, if every time you lower your bucket into your career or your relationships, you hear that hollow, dry scrape of wood against stone, the answer is not a better shovel. It is a complete surrender. The living water is not a reward for the people who dig the deepest holes. It is a rescue for the people who are finally ready to admit they are dying of thirst. The vine does not ask the branch to perform, and the river does not ask the dry ground to manufacture rain. And may the God who is the fountain of living waters flood your... A prophet stands over a cracked underground pit, looking at a puddle of thick, brown mud. It was water that moved, water that made a sound, water that possessed its own kinetic energy. You could not control it. Dry, cracked places with his presence, and give you the courage to finally drop the jar. You could not contain it in a plastered pit. You could only stand in its current. Dead water requires your labor to draw it up. Living water comes looking for you. The question of the biblical narrative is not whether you are thirsty. Every human being is born thirsty. The question is where you are taking your cup. And to see how devastating that choice can be, you cannot start in the New Testament. You have to start 600 years earlier. In the final, crumbling days of Jerusalem, you have to listen to a prophet who watched an entire nation die of thirst while holding shovels in their hands. The book of Jeremiah reads like a coroner's report, an autopsy of a nation that died of thirst. In chapter 2, verse 13, God brings a formal legal charge against the people of Israel. It is brief, it is devastating, and it centers entirely on ancient water technology. Listen to the charge. My people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and they have hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. A crowd of thousands watches a priest pour a golden pitcher of water across a limestone altar, chanting for rain. Look at the sheer physical effort in that text. Hewing a cistern is not a casual task. It is brutal. Industrial labor. You hike out to the limestone bedrock. You strike iron against stone. You swing a hammer until your hands blister. You haul heavy baskets of rock out of a narrowing hole. You build fires inside the pit to heat the limestone. You throw cold water on the hot rock to crack it. You crush the rubble into powder. You mix it into plaster. You smear it onto the jagged walls in the dark. You wait for it to cure. You sweat. You bleed. You wait for the autumn rains. The water flows in. It sits. It turns brown. It tastes like minerals and mud. But it is yours. You control it. And then, the ground shifts. A minor fault line adjusts beneath the Judean hills. A microscopic fracture snakes its way up your plaster wall. The water slowly bleeds out into the surrounding dirt. You lower your bucket, and you hear the scrape of wood against dry rock. You are left with an empty pit, a mouth full of dust, a shovel in your tired hands. The tragedy of Jeremiah 2 is the contrast. God calls himself the fountain of living waters, the Mayim Chayim, the artesian spring bursting out of the mountain. Different centuries, different stories, but the same desperate search for the exact same thing. You can feel the thirst in these texts. It requires no shovels. It requires no fires. It requires no plaster. It runs entirely on its own, endless. Roaring momentum. It is free. It is abundant. But human nature hates what it cannot control. We want to own our supply. We want to measure our reservoir. We trade the roaring river for a stagnant puddle, simply because we built the puddle. Idolatry is not just bowing to a wooden statue. It is the exhausting, back-breaking labor of trying to hold your own water. This is the diagnosis of the human condition. We dig for significance. We dig for security. We dig for affection. We plaster the walls of our careers, our bank accounts, our reputations, hoping this time the vessel holds. But the plaster always cracks. The earth always shifts. The supply always drains away. The people of Jeremiah's day chose the shovel. They chose the cracked pit. And it broke the nation. 6 centuries pass. The physical landscape of Israel changes. The Roman Empire paves the roads. But the spiritual landscape remains exactly the same. The buckets are still being lowered into the dark. And one of those buckets belongs to a woman walking alone toward a well. At the hottest hour of the day, the dirt road outside Sychar bakes under a midday sun. The heat is absolute. The shadows are gone. A woman walks alone toward an ancient stone well. The landscape of the ancient Near East is unforgiving. A terrain of limestone and dust where survival depends entirely on what falls from the sky. Carrying a clay jar on her shoulder. Feel the physical reality of that jar. Empty. The fired clay is heavy, full. It is a crushing, 50-pound burden, pressing into her collarbone, forcing her spine to adjust to the weight. In the 1st century Middle East, women draw water in the cool of the morning or the shadows of the evening. They go in groups. The well is the social center of the village, the place of laughter, of news, of community. To go to the well is to be seen. But she goes at the 6th hour, high noon. She goes when the sun is a hammer, specifically because the well will be abandoned. Her timing is not a preference. It is an exile. She is avoiding the eyes of the village. She is avoiding the whispers about her 5 failed marriages, about the man she is currently living with, about the wreckage of a life that has left her completely isolated. She is carrying the weight of the jar. But the physical weight is nothing compared to the invisible weight she drags down, that dirt road, every single day. She reaches Jacob's well. It is a massive shaft cut through solid rock, plunging more than 100 feet into the earth. To get water here requires a long rope, a heavy bucket, and exhausted muscles. It is the ultimate symbol of the gathered water Jeremiah warned about. Water you must fight the earth to retrieve, day after day, only to grow thirsty again. Every day, the rope goes down. Every day. In Egypt, you had the Nile. In Mesopotamia, you had the Tigris and the Euphrates. But in the hills of Judea, you looked up. Bucket comes up. Every day. The thirst returns. She approaches the stone edge. She expects the silence of the midday heat. But someone is already there. A Jewish rabbi sits on the stones, dust on his feet, exhausted from a long journey through the Samaritan hill country. Centuries of ethnic hostility, centuries of religious purity laws, centuries of ingrained hatred dictate that they should not even make eye contact. A Jewish teacher does not speak to a Samaritan. A man does not speak to an unaccompanied woman. But as she uncoils her rope, the rabbi breaks every cultural rule in the ancient world. He asks her for a drink. She is stunned. She points out the impossible social boundaries he has just crossed. But Jesus does not engage in a debate about ancient prejudices. He pivots the conversation entirely. He tells her that if she knew who he was, she would be the one asking him for a drink. And then, he offers her the Mayim Chaim, the living water. What happens next changes how you read the rest of the New Testament, because the misunderstanding that unfolds between them hangs on a single Greek word hiding just beneath the English translation. She is looking at a hole in the ground. He is talking about a river. In John chapter 4, the English translation masks a subtle, profound linguistic collision. The woman and Jesus are having a conversation about water. You waited for the autumn rains to soften the earth and the spring rains to swell the grain. But they are completely talking past one another. The confusion is not just spiritual. It is structural, and you can only see it if you look at the original Greek text beneath their dialogue. When the woman looks at the deep shaft in the ground, the word she uses for the well is the Greek phreer. But when Jesus speaks about the water he gives, he uses an entirely different Greek word. He calls it a pega. These two words are not synonyms. They represent two fundamentally opposed ways of surviving in the desert. A phreer is a pit, a dug hole, a vertical shaft carved out of the earth by human hands. Imagine the sensory, physical reality of a phreer, the scrape of a wooden bucket against dry limestone, the echo of a rock falling for seconds before it hits the stagnant, metallic-tasting mud at the bottom. It represents the exhausting labor of Jeremiah's broken cisterns. But a pege is a fountain. It is an artesian spring, a pressurized source that violently pushes its way up through the bedrock. A phreer is silent. A pege roars. A phreer requires you to lower a rope into the dark. A pege rushes up to soak your feet. If this kind of linguistic detail is changing the way you read your Bible, you're exactly who this channel is for. And when the sky turned to iron, the land turned to ash. Water was not a utility. Water was life itself. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the conversation at the well hits a breaking point. Jesus tells her that the water he gives will become in her a pege, a spring of water welling up to eternal life. She is utterly exhausted from hauling heavy clay jars from a freer, a dead pit that demands her sweat every single day. He is offering to place a pega, an unstoppable, self-sustaining geyser, directly inside her chest. This word pege carries massive theological weight across the biblical narrative. It is the exact same word John will use decades later, when he writes the book of Revelation, describing the end of all things. In Revelation 21, God promises, "To the thirsty I will give from the spring the pege of the water of life without payment." It is the fountain of Eden, restored. When she asks for this water, she is still thinking about plumbing. She wants a magic bucket that will save her the humiliating midday walk to Jacob's well. But Jesus is offering an ontological transformation. The living water is not a reward for hauling a heavier bucket. It is the end of the bucket altogether. Grace is not a cistern you dig. It is a spring that erupts. Most people assume that when Jesus offers a Samaritan woman living water, he is just using a beautiful, poetic metaphor for spiritual peace. The woman drops her clay water jar on the stones and runs back to the very city she was hiding from. But Jesus' promise of living water was not just for a lonely woman in Samaria. 6 months later, he is going to make the exact same offer. But this time, he will not do it at an abandoned well. He will do it in front of tens of thousands of people, right at the climax of the most spectacular water ritual in the ancient world. Autumn arrives in Jerusalem. The city swells with pilgrims. The Feast of Tabernacles begins. For 7 days, the people remember the desert. For 7 days, they pray for rain. The physical survival of the entire nation depends on what happens next. The winter rains must fall. The crops must grow. The cisterns must fill. And to guarantee the water, the priests perform the most dramatic, sensory-heavy ritual of the year, the water libation ceremony. A high priest descends the stone steps to the pool of Siloam. He carries a solid gold pitcher. He dips it into the pool. He turns back toward the Temple Mount. A massive procession follows him. A choir of Levites sings the Psalms. The crowd waves branches of palm and willow. The air is thick with the smell of burning frankincense and roasting sacrifices. The priest reaches the water gate.